Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Thank you for joining this GP Strategies webinar, where we'll explore best practices and innovative insights to help you and your organization improve performance.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're so glad you're joining us today. We're going to get started in a minute. So before we do, we always love to know where you're joining us from. So let's test out the chat feature and make sure I did my due diligence right and gave everybody freedom and access to it. So we always love to hear where you're calling in from, say hello, add a location. We like to always see how far and wide our community reaches. So please feel free to add. Wow, we've got from one end to the other. We've got from California to Germany, Boston on the way on the East Coast, West London. Oh, I love to see that. I love it. I love that technology allows us all to be in the same room at the same time while we're making things happen. So again, keep them coming. My name is Kim Heyer. I'm with GP Strategies, and I'm just your host for today. I'm going to guide you through today's topic and just introduce you to our panel of speakers shortly. And as always, we just want to go over a few housekeeping tips before we let you all start the session. So today's session is being recorded. We will be sending out a link to your email address you provided us with within the next 24 hours or so. And as always, even though you're on mute, we always want our discussions to be as interactive as possible. So feel free to use the chat to share thoughts with your fellow attendees as well as our panelists today. Make sure you share it with everyone so that everyone can see your thoughts. For those of you who don't have access to the chat feature, feel free to raise your hand or use the Q&A feature. This way we can acknowledge your interaction as well. If you have specific questions, we ask that you add them to the Q&A section so that we can make sure that we answer them during the presentation, or if no time permitting, we can save them till the end. All right, let's get started. If you've joined us before, we're so glad to have you back. And if this is your first session with us, well, a big welcome goes out to you. So today's session on reimagining learning, performance in the flow of work. For the next 45 minutes, our panel of experts are going to be going to discuss what learning in the flow of work really means and how to make it work for your organization. So again, thank you all for being here. I want to thank our presenters for being here as well, and I'm going to introduce them right now. So Andrew Jolly, he is GP Senior Director of Strategy. Welcome. Jeff Bloom, our Principal Learning Consultant. And lovely Ella Richardson, she's our Senior Director of Consulting. And finally, our Master of Ceremony today, Tom Pizer. He is GP Strategies Senior Director of Learning and Technologies. So with that, Tom, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Kim, and thank you everyone from joining from all over the globe. We welcome you to this discussion, and we hope that you will be equal participants in our conversation. So the catalyst for the discussion today, as you can imagine, today's discussion came up in the course of talking about the impact of AI in the L&D industry and where we hope to go with things. You know, there's been a lot of disruption, and there are a ton of great advances, a ton of new learning approaches. But really, our philosophical discussion got into where are we going with all of this? So for those of us who have been in the industry for a long time, some of us might remember our good friend Clippy. I spent entirely too much time making this last night. Clippy, who was introduced in the 1997 Office Suite, was an anthropomorphic paperclip that would insert itself into virtually everything that you were doing. And it was based off of rules. So, you know, if you clicked on a particular button, or if you opened up a particular type of document, Clippy would show up. and it would insert itself virtually into the conversation. And it proved in the very early stages almost impossible to kill it off or turn it off. The problems with Clippy were many, but the underlying problem was kind of a lack of intelligence. It lacked context. It had no insight into what I likely needed to accomplish, what my skills were, what my career path was in the organization, insight into my communications, my calendar, even my personal goals. So that's the catalyst of the conversation today, and that's where we're going to be going with things. The format is, as described, we're going to have a panel discussion, but like I said, we'd like to start with you. So let's start with a question. Let's start with a question to our attendees. What does learning in the flow of work mean to you? I'd like to hear from you. So let's see some answers in the chat. Clippy. Yeah, does everybody miss Clippy?
Nope.
Maybe while people are, here we go. Here we've got some coming in.
I can't believe you started with killing off Clippy. I'd like to see you've reimagined him for our conversation there.
Yes. Like I said, spent entirely too much time making this. Learning in small chunks so that it can be easily applied, appropriate, relevant support when needed in the moment of need. Thinking of how we often use YouTube videos. Yeah, like that.
I like what Alison said about, does it change behavior and or exchange knowledge? I think that's something I'd definitely like for us to hit on later.
Good question. Learning in the process of learning in the process of working, learning in the process of need. Some good answers. Let me turn it to the panel. Just generally, quickly, what do we think? What do we think when we think learning at the time of need? Andrew?
Well, I like in the moment of need. I think for me, it's the opposite of what we would call step out learning. I mean, a lot of the learning and training that we've been doing, you do a course, you go somewhere, you mentally step away from work to do that kind of training or learning or knowledge gathering, and then you go back to your work. It's the opposite of that.
Jeff?
Yeah, I think it means different things in different contexts, and I really like the idea that it keeps me working and that I can solve a problem on the go. But I normally work in an office, and obviously other people work in construction sites, or they work on production lines, or they work in the military, or they work in hospitals. And so learning in the flow of work, I think, can be different in different contexts because people have different things at their fingertips,
Yeah. Someone said something interesting there about short transferable learning sequences. And I thought that was a really interesting one because, I totally agree that it's kind of like in the moment, it's short. Transferable would be great. But like Jeff, like you were saying, for me, it's about being very context dependent. So, we're not going outside, but we're actually like deliberately integrating learning into the workflow of where people actually are and what work they're actually doing. And that could be either knowledge or learning experiences. But either way, it's all about, as someone else said, it's about driving for behavior and performance rather than taking people out of the work that they're doing.
Yeah. Context is key. Andrew, maybe a first question for you. Why do you think it is more relevant now than ever before?
It's interesting. I think it's always been relevant, by the way, but it is more kind of poignant right now. And I think you gave us a clue at the beginning, Tom. I mean, just to say, it's always been relevant way back, all non-professional. I mean, if you were going to be a doctor or an accountant, you did your professional learning. All non-professional learning would have been kind of on the job. You'd go into an office, people around you, your boss would teach you stuff and support you as you got better at your work. Training came along, and a lot of that was really what I called earlier step out training courses. You'd go and you'd do a course, you'd do a digital course, you'd do a live course, you'd come back. Now we have technology that enables us to bring the learning back closer to people, supported in many ways. And the real kind of major shift is, as you said, Tom, AI. And that brings the spotlight right back to this driver that has always been there, which is to keep learning close to work.
And is that what differentiates it? How does it differ from traditional learning?
Well, I think traditionally the starting place was smaller, more relevant, and absolutely connected to moment of need. And I think that's been referenced by some of the people here, and I think micro learning and just in time learning were the kind of precursor of all of this.
Absolutely.
And I think I'd say, Tom, just to add to that, we might be familiar with, the electronic performance support systems of yesteryear. But the reality is, like Andrew was saying, now with AI, like we've never been at a moment where it's more possible to understand people's context, what they're doing, and actually kind of provide interventions that are truly bespoke or personalized to their situation. And I think that's the thing for me of like, why are we still talking about this and what's really different today than, compared to, a few years ago, really.
So how can we create learning programs or learning resources that meet these diverse requirements? Ella?
I think it's really, for me, it's understanding the context in which people are operating and what it is that they're trying to do. It's really understanding that workflow rather than, seeing everything as a training need. Often, I think it's, for traditional learning, it's often about providing the opportunity to practice. And here it's about enhancing performance on the job. Mm-hmm. And so it's really seeing it as like understanding the context in which people are operating and what's needed to deliver performance in the moment, rather than taking them away from the situation in which they're operating.
Right. Perhaps not replacing existing learning, but providing just in time, maybe pulling from that existing content, but making it, again, I'm going to use the word probably many times here, very contextual. Jeff, I wonder, when do we think it is not useful?
Well, I think, not everything can be dealt with through learning in the flow of work. If you're flying a jumbo jet, or you're carrying out a complex surgical procedure, then there's some sort of core base level skills that you need to cover. And I think that actually in any role, there's a role for lots of different forms of training to get to the point where you're capable in the role. So I think learning in the flow of work is, I like the definition of flow as being when things are really moving and you're almost unconsciously operating really efficiently. And then if you're trying to kind of make progress with something, then learning the flow of work just helps you keep making that progress, or solves a micro problem as you're going along, or fixing something that's difficult. But there's so many other forms of learning. Whether you're doing a master's degree, or whether you're becoming qualified as a doctor, or you wouldn't want to, might have to, but you wouldn't want to learn how to operate a piece of complex military armaments for the first time without being trained on it first. And similarly, actually, I think that some sort of aspects of leadership training, and there's forms of coaching and development which are definitely not learning in the flow of work, even though you can have kind of micro coaching interventions. But I mean, obviously, we're here today to talking about learning in the flow of work, but that doesn't mean that it can do everything or should take over from everything.
Yeah, and those are some really good examples. But I often think about, when someone's really new to something, if you're onboarding someone to a particular new skill or an organization, or it's like a new area of knowledge, a new domain for them, those are sometimes where, if you think simply about a system, you often need to understand like why you're using the system, what it's for, how you're doing it. Then you might have some, just-in-time support and learning in the flow of work to support you when you're more sophisticated user. But the reality is, if you're dealing with something like deep skills, like Jeff was describing, or really sensitive topics where there might be ethical questions, or anything even just high pressure, actually having a nudge that comes into your environment, if you are, in that kind of situation, can actually become more distracting or more noisy. So I think that's where we have to be really sensitive to what the right use cases are, and design really intentionally for that.
Yeah, we don't want the modern equivalent of Clippy jumping on us every moment of every day.
I might be the modern equivalent of Clippy, Tom, but I might just annoy my colleagues by constantly asking them questions in Teams.
Andrew,
and I get the learning in the flow of work, but they get the disruption in the flow of work.
Andrew, you were about to say something.
Yes, I was just going to add one more scenario, which is when a reflective position is useful. So a lot of leadership and coaching and soft skills training is really best done from a distance from your work, and by stepping away from that everyday moment and reflecting on, for instance, how you are as a leader or a manager or a decision maker, can be incredibly powerful as part of the learning journey.
Yeah. That really made me think about. I can think of an alternative to that, though. If I have an agent that is kind of supporting me as my digital coach or as my digital mentor, if that agent is aware of some of my leadership goals, perhaps it acts as a role play agent for me. Maybe maybe at the point of need, maybe in a more complex environment by looking at my upcoming, coaching conversations with my employees. Maybe it does inject itself there. There seems to be a lot of different types and different approaches to this. Do we have any frameworks? Do we have any models to help us wrap our heads around, what learning in the flow of work might look like? Jeff, it looks like you're pulling something up here.
I'm putting something up, and I think this is just something that came out of a conversation we were having about this topic. So I wouldn't describe it necessarily as a kind of fully formed model, but when we were talking about what learning the flow of work meant to each other, we realized we were sometimes talking about different things, and we were kind of working out, well, why was that? And so what we realized was that there's a number of different, and this is probably not the only dimension, there's a number of different dimensions to learning in the flow of work. And we talked about the context as an example. But sometimes the needs are, learning the flow of work, I need to know something. I'm pulling that information from somewhere. And sometimes it's simple and sometimes it's complex. Sometimes I'm getting it from public sources, and sometimes I'm getting it from, inside the company's data stores and where their USPs and their trade secrets live. And so we put together this it looks like a Rubik's Cube, but it's a three-dimensional matrix. And so it was trying to pull out some reasons why sometimes learning in the flow of work feels different for different people. And it was a way, I wouldn't call it a model. Well, it is a model, but it's a model that helped us understand why we were thinking about things differently. And so, and we just pulled out a few examples from this. So if I just pull up a couple of them. So for example, a simple curated pull requirement might be, I'm a new member of the team. I need to know how to complete my expenses on my timesheet. I need to know it when I need to do it. I need to get that information to be able to enable me to do it. That's a sort of simple curated pull. It's curated because someone has provided the information, probably from within the company. So that's something that's sort of curated, simple, and pull. And then something that might be a bit more complex and curated and pull might be around something like product maintenance. So, for example, I still, use a photocopier or a printer occasionally, and sometimes, as they always have done, they break down. But actually, to be able to replace the toner cartridge or to replace the, I don't know, the sort of heat element, that's a kind of something I need because I've got to get my stuff printed. But actually, it's got to be curated because it's specific to what I'm working with, and it's a bit more complex. So something like product maintenance might sit in that space. And of course, something like that might feel very different. You know, I might be given knowledge around how to complete my timesheet, whereas I might be shown a video in terms of how to do something like repressurize a boiler or something like that. And then there's something that's sort of more complex curated push. So again, this would come from the company. So if a company's about to launch a new product and people are busy selling the existing product, obviously you want to push out the fact this new product exists. And so you don't want people to, you probably want people to sell the old product as fast as possible, but rapidly move on to the new product. So that's complex, and that's in the flow of work, because if you're in sales, you need to know those new products are available because they might absolutely meet the next customer's needs that walks through the door. And then, but a product update, for example, also you need to be aware of. Maybe something like a product recall or a price change or something like that. That's obviously much more simple, curated push. So all of those sorts of things are on the side where the organization has to have something available and probably needs to have something prepared. Whereas the public stuff, I mean, I use Copilot, Google, all sorts of different search engines, whether they're in SharePoint or wherever they are, to find stuff that is generally available. So something like a complex public push, new tax legislation, it's pushed because it has to be formulated, it has to be documented, it has to be provided, but I ought to be able to get that available publicly. Maybe there's some special detail that's available to accountancy firms. And then something that's much more simple public push might be something around something like public hygiene. So back in the days of COVID, we were working with some of the soap providers to push how to wash your hands and things like that. And that was obviously learning in the moment of need, because COVID was a pretty pressing need. And here's another example, which is a sort of something that's a bit more of a simple public pull. Warranty conditions. You only need to know warranty conditions when something goes wrong, and you may be using those to advise a customer, or you may be the customer. But those, those things for me all feel a little bit different. And this model with these dimensions helped me to sort of understand why, and why a solution that might work for people in the public wouldn't necessarily work for people within an organization. Something that's a complex thing like machine maintenance needs material prepared for it. You can't just get ChatGPT to make it up. It may not have that video file, for example. So yeah, that's an example of a model. And some of these examples, I think, we might talk about, where we've seen them in clients and we've helped clients with them.
I'm glad that your mind thinks in three dimensions, Jeff. You have a way of explaining things to me in the way that I understand. Do we have some examples that we could share? And maybe Jeff, keep the model up for just a moment. And panelists, do we have some examples of these types of approaches?
I've got one, Tom, which I think was my first kind of real experience many years ago of attempting to create learning in the flow of work, which I think would be curated, simple pull in a big service organization which had a lot of clients. If somebody was put onto a new project with a new client, then at the top of the folder with all the information around that client, there was a top of wherever the internal knowledge was kept. There was a folder with everything you need to know about this client and this sector. And we would create short videos, we would create short fact sheets, checklists, everything you need to know about this component of the pharma industry or whatever. So anybody starting a new project would see that, do it, and it wasn't a push thing. It was, they knew it was there. They get the summaries. And of course, nowadays with AI, you could make sure those were all fresh, up to date, relevant, and appropriate to exactly what's happening today in that business.
Yeah. It's It's kind of like a support peer, or perhaps a support mentor that knows where all of the information is, knows where all of the knowledge is, and rather than requiring you to remember and seek it, that agent can bring it to you, recognizing when you'll need that. That makes me think about an example that we just recently developed it as a team. We were working for a large automotive manufacturer, and they have what are called warranty specialists in dealerships across the U.S. These dealerships have warranties for all of their vehicles, all of their brands, past and present. And these warranty specialists, is often a single individual at a dealership, is required to be able to quickly and accurately look up warranty information for these vehicles. And so they've got to read through a lot of documentation. They've got to cross-reference between older models and newer models and product updates. We were thinking, wouldn't it be great if we could give this person a companion, something where they could pull information, but have a conversation with the information, really talk to the agent and have that agent understand what they're looking for and perform all of that cross-reference for them. So I think that's more along the lines of a curated complex pull, which would be on the far right bottom portion of this cube. Any other examples?
I've got another. So along some similar lines, really, but I think, one of the places where we've done this a lot is in support of sales professionals. And so I think we've worked on a number of initiatives, but often around like product knowledge and supporting conversations with customers. Historically, people have been taken off the shop floor or off phones having conversations with customers. And actually, like, quite a lot of work that we've done over the years has been about how do we maintain them to keep having that conversation with the customer? How do we give them all of the information that they need without, them having to learn by rote, or taking them out and away from the conversations that they need to be having. Mm-hmm. And so that's very much around how do we understand what technologies they're using on the shop floor, on the forecourt, for automotive customers, and really how do we give them the tools and the information that they need at their fingertips in order to support those kinds of conversations.
Right, almost instantly, kind of like the Matrix, right? Just pump that information right in there.
I mean, this is the new thing, though, with glasses. We saw it years ago with Google Glass. We're seeing more now with Meta and Ray-Ban. The possibilities are kind of endless there in terms of, what kind of information we might design for people in the moment that's going to support them having conversations and interacting with others, that's private to them and kind of makes that experience, the performance, seamless.
That is a great point. And the technologies that may lean into supporting this are amazing. I just saw an advertisement for the latest Meta and Ray-Ban version of their glasses, where they are purporting to provide automatic translation, and imagine that coming into voice recognition, pattern recognition, context. Andrew, I see that you have your hand up.
It's a great example of in the flow of work, isn't it? You actually design out the need to learn how to speak another language.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to sort of emphasize the way this conversation is going, which is, so what Jeff showed us was a really nice model for thinking about the different scenarios. But each of those scenarios, there is a different way of getting the learning to the learner that is appropriate to that particular context. So whether it's glasses or a panel at one side of your screen or your mobile or whatever, there is a way of getting as close to that person to deliver what they need without breaking the work flow, if you like.
Yep. Jeff?
Yeah, I was just picking up some stuff from the chat. So Brent, a little while ago, and you started to touch on this, was sort of saying, please discuss different types of technologies that can support this stuff, and referred specifically to electronic performance support systems, traditional curated systems like that. I think one of the things I'm very aware of is the proliferation of technologies and the different places I can go and look. And I almost want to have a kind of a meta layer to say, well, I can go and get this from potentially even my LMS, but I can get it from ChatGPT, or I can get it from Copilot, or I can get it from YouTube, or I can get it from something like an EPSS. But there is actually so many technologies around now, and I think at the moment we're in a period of divergence, and it'd be very interesting to see how much some of our large language models, internal or external, start to create some convergence, so that we don't have quite so many places to get our learning in the flow of work.
Absolutely, and I think that also, and I'm looking at Connie's got Connie put a question in there, curious to know what technologies people are using to get this information to employees. The jury is out right now. There is so much disruption in the industry. We are currently working with and using a number of different technologies and a number of different approaches, some of them proprietary and some of them on the horizon from whole technology stacks like Google and like Microsoft. Ella, I see that you've got your hand up.
Yeah, because I think it's such an interesting question, and and the really annoying answer is, I guess it kind of depends, and it's so many different technologies. I think the danger when we're talking about learning in the flow of work is almost sometimes we're thinking about like traditional like learning systems and LMSs and SharePoint, and I think I want to make the point that I think that's often not it. I think it can be, but I think it has to be done really sensitively, because it's not about driving people to a new destination. It should be about bringing the learning into where they are. And so then by virtue of that, when we're talking about technologies, it's kind of, it depends what technology is being used by that person in that role in that organization. And then only supplementing if it's like absolutely necessary. I know that's obviously quite tricky, because it means, you have to have ownership over some of those systems. And that's when I think you can get smart about how you supplement. But ultimately, like, technology has to be the enabler of this. And we have to think about how can we architect cleverly rather than, just only looking at, what technologies are at our disposal, like right this second, and think a bit more smartly about how we're going to enable the performance for this group of users.
But I think very pragmatically, because I know how pragmatic you are, Ella. The first thing we do is look at what you've got, and even within Zoom, it's probable that some people on the call don't have access to chat, and other people do. So as well as what might be the best possible solution, it needs to be the right solution for the environment. It needs to be the solution that potentially is already within your hands. It might be a mobile phone, but even if you're on a production line, you may not be able to have your phone with you, So, so I think it isn't always the latest and greatest tech stack that costs multiple millions of pounds if you're a small company that, turns over $2 million and employs 10 people.
No, I think it's asking the right questions, because, we're at a moment, I think, with the rise of AI, with open standards, with platforms that can you can have APIs that integrate with each other. I mean, Tom, this is your sweet spot more so than mine, but the reality is that learning can be delivered at point of need, and I think it's really important to say, as you say, what do we have at our disposal, and also can we think critically about the tech stack that we've got and how we might influence it, which is sometimes we don't take the moment to actually just even assess that, and there's lots of untapped potential there.
Right, and I think that we're going to see a much more of a further convergence of technologies, acquisitions, tech stacks, and we're going to see more and more of these technologies playing not just playing well together, but integrating integrating better together. So how do we balance intentional learning moments with these just-in-time nudges?
So I'd like to take this one to start. I mean, I think we've spoken a bit about this already, but I think it's really understanding whether you need an immediate performance outcome or you're looking for like the depth of skills development. And then, learning in the flow of work is really fundamentally about how you're driving performance in the moment. We're enabling people in the moment to adapt and to solve problems and to achieve their business outcomes. So I think really it's fundamentally thinking about what is it that you're trying to do, and then is this the appropriate tool to deliver that, or does it need something else? Does it need something, in prep, or does it need something follow up? And how might you do that in the moment as efficiently as possible?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I totally agree. I think understanding the needs of the learner is something we're always completely passionate about, but that's holds so true with this, because if I'm working on a ward in a hospital, I'm going to have access to different things to help me learn in the flow of work than if I'm in a restaurant or in a retailer or working in an airport or in an office. And we all work in an office, so we naturally lean towards what we can get through our laptops and our phones and our colleagues. But there's probably going to be, with the advent of AI, there may be fewer of us working as information workers and more people doing all of the practical stuff, and they need learning in the flow of work as well.
Well,
I think we also might.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, what Jeff was saying has made me think about, we also need to, I think, step away from kind of traditional learning and thinking about kind of skills, and we need to think about how we're asking people to do jobs differently. We've thought of learning as quite event-based, but actually it's breaking down to what is the task that someone's doing, and how is it that we support them in the moment with that, rather than, and it's thinking more about the skills across the organisation and the tasks that people are doing and how those relate to each other and how we can support them, more so than kind of treating the learning as an event in itself, which is, something that sits outside of the job. It's kind of connecting the skills and the ecosystem in a way so that we're actually enabling performance across roles and how people work.
And so we've got to have insights into this task. We got to have some way to anticipate and understand those tasks, which leads into, I think, kind of the final aspect of this. And we've been touching on it, and we've been talking around it. What does AI have in making learning in the flow of work more achievable or more practical? We're kind of there. We're almost there. We're doing things, but what role does it have in that, AJ?
Well, I think as you say, we have touched on it. It has two critical roles. One in enabling us to deeply understand the moment of need, and when people need something and why they need it. And the other is to help us create the content, the response, the thing that goes back to that person at that moment, that is entirely relevant, up to date, and matches the user's needs. So it's the two things. It's understanding the moment and delivering back quickly.
Yeah. The real opportunity for me in that is, and I guess how that does that is using real-time data. I think so often the frustration for us in like learning and performance is creating a thing that sits on a shelf and ages. But the reality is we've now got the opportunity to, build the ecosystems, have the integrations, that actually we've got, live data and signaling, in the environment. So probably I think the best example of this that I've seen recently is some of the work that our teams have been doing with an automotive client, looking at providing sales training and data around new vehicle launches, it's one thing to know, the stock that you've got and all the features and keep current when you've got new vehicle releases. But actually, when customers are coming in, they're asking you about competitor vehicles. They're telling you that they're looking at certain features and they need things to kind of fit their life and their family. Historically, this is the kind of challenge that we've been producing kind of support materials and resources, but it's impossible to keep up with when you look at the whole, the breadth of that market and the rate
Absolutely.
at which, people are bringing out new products and vehicles. And so the team actually built a really nice application, which effectively, brought in integrations to other vehicle manufacturers' websites. So it's pulling live public data and then supporting those teams with having customer conversations in real time. So, as they're entering into the system, this is the kind of vehicle that a customer's looking for. This is their situation. It's actually feeding them with, here's comparator vehicles that are in the market. Here's our proposition. This is what we'd be recommending, and here's why it's the best possible vehicle for this situation. Effectively, again, that's designing out the need to have all of that information at your fingertips or to learn it, and it's providing them with the ability to deliver the best possible service and in that moment of need, which I thought was a really exciting example of how we're using AI and integrations to enable people in the moment.
That is a really exciting example, and holds the potential to make for us to, for the human who is able to integrate, for the human plus AI, for the human who is able to integrate that technology into their life and into their work, it holds the promise of speed, accuracy, authenticity, connection to our customers, to our teams, to our peers, and to those members that we lead. I see that we're really at the end of our time here. We wanted to get a couple of questions in. Kim, were there any questions, any burning questions that came into the chat?
Yeah, we do have some. There is one. It says, is learning in the flow of work the right approach to driving behavior change? And can you change mindsets in the flow of work? Sounds interesting. Somebody want to take that one?
I love this question.
Yeah.
Thank you to whoever raised that. I think there's some interesting questions there. Is it right? I don't think it's necessarily right for every situation. I think, like we've discussed, I think, if there is a situation in which you're driving a behavior, the use of nudges, there's questions around the ethics of nudging people's behavior, because effectively sometimes you're taking away their ability to choose. And so I don't think it's right for every situation, but certainly where we want to drive behavior, we're doing people in a way that we're giving people the capability, the skills, and the opportunity to do so, and making it really easy for them to make the choice or to incite the behavior that we're looking for. I think I've lost the question now, but I think there's something there about beliefs as well, and it's really hard to change beliefs. But actually, some of the research shows that one of the best ways to do that is through habits. And so actually, in a way here, what you can do with learning in the flow of work and by driving people's behavior is actually you can start to create that habit, which, is probably one of the best ways of actually fundamentally changing beliefs later on down the line. Andrew?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think the place that AI has and learning in the flow of work in behavior change is somewhere around that trigger. It's the nudging, the triggering, the supporting that reminds you of reminds you in the moment of the sort of needed behavior change. I think attitudes and mindsets is a different thing. That is the fundamentals of behavior change, attitudes and mindsets. Perhaps that needs to be done in a more considered way, but those nudges and triggers, I think, are really important.
But if you can get people to wash their hands more effectively, then you've improved their behavior in a small way.
You have, and the hand washing learning that we've done. The trigger is the sign in front of the basin. When you're in the washroom and you need to be reminded how to do that. That's the in the moment trigger.
And if you've got a QR code, you can see how to do it as well.
Yeah, I think what is going to be key is a good stylish pair of Ray-Ban glasses and Clippy reminding me at every waking moment what the next important thing is that I need to do, or the promises that I have made and need to keep. I think, Kim, with that, we have completed our time here. I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Andrew, Ella, and Jeff. First, I want to thank you all for the great discussion, and a really big thank you goes out to everyone who joined us with your time and attention. At the end of the session, we do ask you to take a minute to fill out our survey. Your feedback is really important to us. So we hope you'll join us again for another one of our upcoming webinars. Be sure to visit GP Strategy's website and view the future sessions. And I want to wish everyone on the call today a wonderful and productive rest of your day.
This webinar was brought to you by GP Strategies. Together, we help organizations transform through their people. You can access more webinars or download additional resources by visiting the GP Strategies Resource Library. The link is on your screen and in the description.